Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today at LittleAfrica BronxNews. My name is Mona Davids. I am the founder and publisher of LittleAfrica BronxNews. I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us. As you know, as part of our political coverage for New York City's 2021 municipal elections, we are interviewing Bronx City Council candidates, as well as Bronx Borough President and citywide races candidates, mayor, public advocate, and comptroller. Today, we're honored to have Senator Luis Sepúlveda here with us today to talk about his candidacy and his run for Bronx Borough President. Senator Sepúlveda, thank you so very much for joining us today at LittleAfrica BronxNews. Welcome. And for our viewers who are not familiar with you, please tell us about yourself.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you for having me on your program. I really enjoyed the debate we had a couple of weeks ago. Really thorough, really good questioning. So I want to thank you for that as well. So my name is, as everyone knows, I'm State Senator Luis Sepúlveda. I was elected in the New York State Assembly in 2013. I served in that capacity in the 87th Assembly District, which covers Parkchester, Castle Hill, West Farms, Van Nest, and so forth. Until 2018, I represented them in the Assembly. Then the incumbent senator, ran for the city council in 2018. He was victorious, and I replaced him in a special election in April of 2018. And since then, I've had the honor of representing one of the poorest communities in the Bronx. I have an undergraduate college degree in something called natural sciences, which is a combination of physics, chemistry, and biology. Once upon a time, I wanted to be a doctor. And then I graduated from there. I didn't go to medical school, even though that was the master plan. Instead, I went to law school. And I graduated from law school in 1991. I've been a practicing attorney for almost 30 years now, mostly in the Bronx. I have two wonderful children, age 20, almost 29. My oldest was born on my birthday. And I have a younger one, age 9, who was born in September. We work a lot together as a family. We're going to continue to do so. We absolutely love the Bronx. I've raised large part of my kids in this community, and I intend to stay here for the rest of my life.
Oh, you really took a serious detour from medicine, going into law, going into public service.
Yes.
Yikes! Wow. we're happy to have you in public service, and I'm sure millions of New Yorkers as well are happy.
I'm happy to be here.
Been doing so. Senator Sepúlveda, I always, when speaking with candidates, I always say I applaud everyone for running for office, for public office. It's a big deal. It's a courageous step. Someone like you going from private practice as an attorney to running for public office. Now you're seeking to run for Bronx Borough President, which is quite a big deal, representing the Bronx, even more so now with COVID-19. With the devastation that our communities have experienced here in the Bronx, and coming up also with a COVID-19 recovery plan. So I want to go into COVID-19. What is your recovery plan for COVID-19? We heard now that, for example, also Yankee Stadium is going to be a vaccination site. There's so much work to be done, and the Bronx has been the hardest hit out of all the 5 boroughs for everything when it comes to COVID-19, economically, socially, health-wise, we are the hardest hit borough. So when elected Bronx Borough President, what is your plan? What are your, we'll start with 3 priorities to bring us back from COVID-19's devastation?
Well, you have several things that you have to consider, which is exactly why I decided to run for borough president, because I think I'm the best prepared candidate with the most experience, certainly with the largest legislative package of any of the candidates. And I think my experiences as a assemblyman for 6.5 years and a state senator for almost 3 now put me in a position, I think, to do the work that has to be done. It is because COVID has demonstrated the historical inequities, so many things in the Bronx. We continue to be dead last in health. 62 out of 62 became a hashtag, or not 62 became a hashtag. We're still at the bottom in economic development. We're still at the bottom in housing. We're still at the bottom in food security and graduation rates. Now, we've seen some improvements over the years, but at least for the last 15 years, we continue to be at the bottom of everything that's bad, and at the top, we continue to be at the top of everything that's bad and at the bottom of everything that's good. And so to get out of COVID, you really have to look at historically what's happened in the county of the Bronx. We have historically, either through racism or economic policy that was racist, have been ignored. And that is bubbled to the top now with the coronavirus. And so there are a lot of things that we have to start developing. Look, when we talk about healthcare, the largest non-public employer in the Bronx is the healthcare industry. Yet we are still at the bottom. And why is that? I think that we have to hold our hospitals more accountable. We have to provide the kind of training that medical professionals need in our communities and poor Black and brown communities. We have to establish new protocols at our emergency rooms. We have to establish new medical systems throughout the county so that we can deliver high quality care in this county. And that's something that for some reason we still have not been able to captivate. So you need someone who's going to hold the fire to the feet of people that are in charge of our educational system. When I'm elected, I'm going to open up specifically an office at the borough president's office just to deal with our educational system, our healthcare system. We have the BOEDC for economic development, but by and large, that agency hasn't been run by people that I think are best qualified to bring economic development into the county. You look at what we have to do in the future. Well, clearly we have to continue using PPEs, right? Face masks and hand sanitizers. Look, from the beginning of the pandemic, I was out at subway stations and throughout the community giving out face masks and giving out hand sanitizer and other things that we need. We've given over 40,000 masks. We secured 250,000 face masks through the Chinese Economic Council and Chinese business in here. I was able to work that out where we can get so many masks, and we've been able to do it. We'll talk in the budget now about what we have to do to improve our graduation rates. The point is that there's so much that has to be done now, and so much has been brought to the surface, the historical racist inequities that we have in this county, that the next borough president has to be able to take all of these issues, be creative, think big, think about ways that we can transform this county, because we shouldn't be at the bottom of everything year after year after year. In order to do that, you need somebody experienced like me with the knowledge of how to run a county and how to make sure that we get all the services that we need and put us in a situation so that we continue to be a great place to live.
No, you are quite correct. This not 62 hashtag, we keep on saying that, not 62, not 62, but we are 62. And we're first when it comes to things that we should not be first on, and we're last when it comes to things we should be on the top for. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to delve into these different topics. And the first thing that I'd like to delve into is housing. Housing here in the Bronx. I understand that the legislature passed the eviction moratorium. So now we have that, which is helpful because it stops evictions for now. Um, but but what are we going to do when the moratorium expires? I think it's until May, Senator, if I'm not
May
mistaken.
1st.
May 1st. So while this moratorium is there, the arrears are still piling up. Our families here in the Bronx are still struggling. Many have still not returned to work. We're in a serious second wave of the pandemic. So my question to you is, as borough president, how are you going to support and help these families who come May, come June, are going to be looking at eviction papers without the funds to cover their rent arrears, because it's just not possible to cover whether it's 5 months rent arrears, 6 months rent arrears, and most likely more come June or once this moratorium ends. So what kind of support, or how do you see yourself and the office of the Bronx Borough President getting these families up to date with their rent, but also when it comes to small landlords, the homeowners that have 2 or 3 family homes that rent out, we cannot forget them too, because we have a lot of those in the Bronx. So it's 2 parts to my question, but I'd like to know, how are you going to help families, and how do you see the strategy, the way out of this situation?
Sure. So the moratorium expires on May 1st. You know, I'm losing sleep on a daily basis because I'm concerned about what's going to happen when the moratorium expires. I can tell you this. I would find it difficult to believe that, you know, under the current predicted for eviction rate, that the governor would not extend the moratorium. Certainly the legislature will look at it. The Senate, we've already looked at it with the passing of our bill. If you have a hardship related to COVID, meaning that you have a serious economic loss that prevents you from paying your rent, then you have to fill out a hardship form. The landlord has to provide it for you before he or she commences an eviction proceeding. If they don't provide that form, then you cannot evict. So that people understand that with this hardship form, you will be, the landlord will be entitled to get a judgment against you for rent. But that amount of money that's owed for the back rent related to COVID cannot be the basis for an eviction. In other words, a judge cannot issue an eviction notice or a warrant of eviction to any landlord through a marshal if you can prove through this hardship affidavit that the reason you're not paying your rent is because of COVID. Now, that protects you from the current rent that's owed. Going forward, once the declaration, the emergency declaration has ended, essentially we all have to fend for ourselves, basically, is that the way it translates. I have faith in the governor, I have faith in the legislature, and certainly a new president who I believe would be more sensitive to people getting evicted from their homes. So that's one of the things that I remain hopeful for. Look, we've already looking through this budget now, how we can expand funding to prevent people from being evicted. There was a housing, there was a program that expired February 1st that would allow people, or help people. It was about $100 million that we allocated that would have helped people obtain money for the rents that is expired unless you filled an application before the 1st. But we're going to try, certainly through this budget, to be able to allocate more monies to help people in the event that they fear getting evicted. On a practical level, myself being a housing lawyer for 30 years, I have both not-for-profit organizations, I have private lawyers as a network that are willing to help people if anyone's worried about getting evicted. And you know, we can look at the technicality of a petition. Many times you can have a case, an eviction dismissed because the landlord didn't do certain steps, meaning didn't serve you with the hardship declaration form, or did so improperly, didn't serve you with the petition properly. So we want to help people when they get into the situation where they may be evicted through providing legal services. We want to help people. Legislating right now in the Senate to provide monies, funding, so that people can pay their rent. And we want to work certainly with our local government, the president and the governor, to make sure that they are cognizant at our level, our being one of the poorest, if not the poorest county in the United States. They have to be aware of the suffering that's going to happen if people get evicted. We have to do everything we can as political leaders. I've been on the phone with the governor's office and the mayor's office, all different ways to try to get people funding and try to preserve people's right to remain in their apartments. And I can tell you that as borough president, I'm going to be 10 times more vociferous about this because I'll have a larger platform to talk about it. But I will be on there every single day, whatever outlet I can use to demonstrate how people are suffering, how people are getting evicted, and to do everything possible to prevent that with myself, my colleagues in government, and certainly the governor and the president.
Now that's good to know, because a lot of families I know are unaware of how this process works. Even for myself, I didn't know about this hardship form or affidavit, and what, you know, the protections that this eviction moratorium offers. Yes. And then after the eviction moratorium lapses, what landlords can and cannot do.
So just so you know, I forgot to mention this also. There's a hardship application form for foreclosures as well. So if you own a building with 10 or less units and you are concerned about losing your property to foreclosure because of COVID and financial issues, then there is also a hardship declaration form that you get from Housing Community Renewal in the event that the bank commence a foreclosure proceeding. Now remember, there are two types of banks in New York State. You have a state chartered bank, which basically operates under the permission of New York State. And you have federal chartered banks that operate under a charter of the federal government. So we can legislate more for state banks because we're a state legislature. And what we've done is the landlord, if they say that they're going to lose their unit or their building because of COVID, they fill out this declaration form, and that'll prevent a foreclosure proceeding up until May 1st. But we've also created this hardship form that they have to get, that has to be filled out. Now, at the federal level, for example, a Chase Bank or Citibank, the big banks that are federally chartered, generally speaking, we couldn't do much to prevent foreclosures coming in from the state. So what we did was we essentially put a provision in the statute, in the law, that says that state Supreme Courts, which hear foreclosure proceedings, will not be permitted to hear foreclosure cases with the federal chartered bank. So we're protecting the small landlord and we're protecting the tenant from evictions. I think it's a good mix. Again, once the moratorium is over, I'm pretty confident that we'll get federal dollars or state dollars somehow to protect these landlords from losing their apartments and protecting our tenants landlords from losing their buildings and tenants from losing their apartments.
No, that's very good to know. And as I said before, I think a lot of tenants are unaware, and I think also a lot of small landlords are unaware. So I'm going to follow up with you, because perhaps with your office we could do a workshop, a Zoom workshop, where maybe someone from the nonprofits that you work with, or the attorneys, the housing attorneys that you work for, we could do some type of workshop to let people know that,
absolutely. Right. And in the interim, if anybody needs this assistance, they can always call my Senate office. You can flash the number at 718-991-3161, or they can reach out to me through internet at team@senatorsepulveda.com. And we'd be happy to help even before. If we have this forum, let's do it sooner so people are aware of what's going on.
Yes, no, that would be great. Thank you, because I know it's sorely needed. So continuing on with housing, I was watching the news, and I think it was Channel 11 last night, and they spoke about this senior housing building in the Bronx just last night. The tenants haven't had heat or hot water for a long time now. They showed tenants turning on their stoves. They have portable heaters in their bedroom. One says, "I'm just hoping it doesn't, catch fire with my
Sure.
computer." And it's NYCHA again. Then we have the public advocate's office, whether it was public advocate Tish James, now public advocate Jamani Williams. Everybody comes out with the worst landlords list, but we know who the worst landlord is in New York City. It's NYCHA. And whether it's dilapidated apartments, mold, broken elevators, that another senior citizen died going down the stairs recently, it's an ongoing problem. And people tend to just like kick the can down the road and say, "Oh, well, it's the federal government. There's nothing we can do." But it's heat and hot water. That's not the federal government. They're living in New York City housing authority buildings. So my question to you is, as a Bronx Borough President, how are you going to support our NYCHA families, our children living with lead, our senior citizens right now with no heat and hot water? Like, what action are you going to do to help these families? Because it happens over and over every year, and it hasn't stopped, and we need someone to really tackle this issue.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's a big sore eye. It's a black eye, I should say, in the city of New York. NYCHA is the worst landlord. It's been traditionally, historically, for years. Look, we have to look at the evolution of public housing in this country. Right? Public housing was created during World War II because we needed housing for families that were providing services for the war effort, working in factories and plants and things like that. But they were built primarily for white America. When white America during World War II realized that without the assistance of Black Americans and immigrants, essentially Black and brown communities, that the war effort wasn't going to be as efficient. So they had to build a second set of public housings for African Americans. What happened was, and of course the second set weren't as nicely produced as the ones for white families. So what occurred when the war effort was over, white families moved out of public housing, and these state landlords or city landlords needed to put someone in there. And so they started putting Black families, Black and brown families, into this housing. But what happened was they stopped investing in public housing. And with few exceptions of a couple of Democratic presidents, there hasn't been much reinvestment into public housing in the last 50 years, let's say. There was some during Barack Obama and Clinton, but generally speaking, it's been terribly underfunded for many, I say for several decades now. And so we've been left with this mess. In order to cure every problem that we have with NYCHA, we need about a $34 billion investment. We're not going to get that anytime soon. Unless the government is willing to cut the military budget by maybe 2%, 3%. We could fund all of this stuff and fund a lot more if we cut down on our military budget. But for reasons, regardless, Democrats or Republicans are there for a reason that seems to be a holy grail. Nobody wants to touch it. But the reality is, if you do, you can do a lot of great stuff in this country, including more education funding, more food sources, and so forth. And so what you have now is this monumental mistake that's called public housing, monumental lack of investment in public housing. And by mistake, I mean that it wasn't upkept. They weren't continuous investments. And so in order to remedy some of the problems now, you need drastic measures. For example, the city has about, let's say about 1,000 units. You take 1,000 NYCHA units. It has about $166 million that they need to put them in livable conditions, for lack of a better term. And under the current crisis with COVID, we're not going to necessarily get that money unless we get more through stimulus packages, which I'm hopeful that the new administration will look at. And so we have to look at all options in order to make NYCHA a better place to live. As borough president, you always have the bully pulpit. I can go out there and blast every single elected official or every single supervisor of NYCHA and tell them, you have a list of X number of people that don't have hot water, and these are seniors. What are you going to do with it? In my positions as an assemblyman and a senator, I'm constantly on the phone with the chair and with the person in charge of the repairs throughout the city. I mean, I've called them at 1, 2 in the morning when we've had problems with either heating or water or hot water in our developments. And that's something that I will continue to do once elected. But one of the things that I want to laser focus on is working with my federal representatives, because although we can lay this all at the blame of our federal elected officials, but the reality is that when it comes to public housing, they are the ones that have the most political impact. They are the ones that can make more happen because they are in the seat of government in Congress at the federal level. We're at the state level. So working closely with our federal elected officials, people like Richie Torres, people like Adriano Espaillat, Congressman Bowman, all of these individuals, Schumer, who's now the leader of the Senate, Gillian Brand, who's a senator, the junior senator, but certainly is a New York senator. With all of these forces, with Schumer being now the leader of the Senate, and with the forces that we have now, we should be able to start turning the tide in investment in housing. And that's one place where I'm going to be extremely hyper focused to make sure that our federal representatives continue to push for more dollars so that people can live in housing and public housing without having to worry about their kids getting lead poisoning, or not being able to take a shower in 20-degree weather with warm water, or not being able to basically buy food. I mean, all of these things are intertwined with federal housing, our public housing. And we have to work to do a better job than we've done the last 50, 60 years with public housing.
No, it's just, it's something that every year we hear the same horror stories, and these horror stories are life and death. And when it comes to lead poisoning impacts a child's, the child's entire life. So it's
Sure.
It's
Which is why, Mona, one of the things that I'm going to also do in my office is I'm going to create an office of public housing to deal with these issues, right? A specific office is going to deal with public housing, education. You have to be able to get people that are specialists, people that are experts at a lot of these discussions. You can't hire staff and say, go deal with housing, go deal with that. And so our office is going to do specifically that, hire the best minds to deal with the issues of public housing, education, food insecurity, and so forth.
No, that's good to know. Now, coming back to problems with the repairs in public housing, what's been one of the solutions put forth is by government is what is called the RAD program.
Yes.
And there's been, some people are for the RAD program, a lot of tenants are for it, but there are also a lot of tenants who are against the RAD program. Some view it as a way of privatization. So my question to you is, what is your position on the RAD program? And yeah, we'll start with that.
Well, anytime that you have programs that bring private investment to public housing or public anything, one of the things that I am immediately concerned about is the issue of displacement.
Yes.
We don't know if the rental assistance demonstration is a program, it's a backhanded way, or backdoor way, I should say, of gentrifying public housing. We just don't know. I've spoken with people that are in a RAD development, and most of them are happy with what they've seen. They've said that the improvements are immediate. I've spoken with people who are concerned about it because clearly they don't have it yet in their development because they are resisting it. Part of the issue is, how do we mend the fear gap? Is RAD essentially going to be something that's positive? We're looking for private investment to make up some of the $1 billion that I said we need in order to bring NYCHA apartments up to code and livable. How do we do that? I just spoke about the difficulty with the budget. So we tend to turn to private investment. According to some of the figures that we have, without RAD, for those 1,000 units that I talked about, the city has about $22 million to invest to fix these apartments. That's about $80 billion less than what we need. With RAD, and these are numbers that have been presented, I can't verify them or not, but they've been presented as research. For those 1,000 units, we'll get about $260 million. So the private investment, ostensibly, if it works, can go to make these repairs. You have a private company running the developments. You don't lose. It'll be under Section 8 now rather than Section 9 for housing developments, but under Section 8, since this is a voucher-based program, the city still controls who gets public housing because they have to approve the Section 8 program. So that's not gone. You still have some of your rights remain, like succession rights. Your rent is going to be based again on 30% of your income, and I'd say about 95% of your rights as tenants remain in effect, including succession rights and your rights to challenge certain repairs and costs. So on one side, you have the financial wherewithal, the private investment to ostensibly repair some of these issues. On the other side, you have people that are concerned about, legitimately concerned about private investment going into public housing. So what I say is, let's read every piece of research and data. Let's make sure that we have all the information we need about the RAD program, and let's see how it works in terms of a particular development. Let's take it one development at a time. If we have a development wherein the tenants agree, because I don't want to shove this down anybody's throat either. If the tenants are opposed to it, then we don't put them on a trial basis to be one of the developments that will see how RAD works. But we can do it piecemeal. And if it works, then let's continue to use it. If it doesn't work, then we stop. If the tenants don't want it, then we don't give it to them. But certainly we have to look at all alternatives to remedy some of the major issues that we have with public housing.
No, I think that's fair. That is a fair way of handling the situation. It's, you know, I understand the tenants' concerns, and like I said, some are for, some are against, but the ones who are in complexes now under the RAD program seem to be pleased, but the privatization concerns are real. I'm not sure, but is this section Section 8 transferable, or it's only when you are in the RAD NYCHA building?
No, the vouchers for Section 8, you have to be vouchered, get a Section 8 voucher to move into the RAD complex, right? Right now, I believe the funding, there has to be a wall between the government funding private entities. So that they use these legal mechanisms in order to fund. So what they do is now they use Section 8 voucher system with these private developments, so that people that would qualify currently that are living in public housing will remain living in public housing.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
no one will be evicted. No one will lose their rights to live there. Everything remains the same. under this legal creation to be able to bring funding into private developments.
Okay, all right. That's good to know and good to share with Bronxites.
Yes.
My final question when it comes to housing, and this is something that um, I I think that the city and possibly the state legislature um, does have some sway over, and that is the city FEPS program. Recently, there was an article in the New York Times, I think like earlier this week, and the article was about a homeless family um, living in a shelter. They have the city FEPS voucher, which is for our viewers that don't know, it's a voucher that you can rent an apartment for a certain amount. So whether it's a studio, 1 bedroom, a 2 bedroom, it's a voucher from the city for X amount of dollars to rent an apartment to help people transition out of the shelters. But the problem with the city FEPS voucher is management companies, realtors are not accepting the city FEPS voucher because one, they prefer the Section 8 voucher, but also two, the amount of money for the city FEPS voucher, it's just not, it's nowhere near enough for a 1 bedroom, if that's what your voucher is for, or 2 bedroom. And this is something that is on a city level, and it's also something perhaps the bully pulpit that comes with the Bronx Borough President's office could be helpful on. And I'm not sure if this is also something that the state legislature could take a look at. But how would you address this? Because this is a problem, because families cannot move out of the shelters because the city FEPS voucher is not being accepted, and the amount of money for the city FEPS voucher for these different rental apartments is simply not, it's simply nowhere near enough. So, Senator, how would you help these families? Because these are thousands of families.
Well, not only are the landlords and management companies resisting to FEPS, but it's just a poorly managed agency. Because I've had to deal with them in the past. They're not the most efficient companies, but the agencies. But look, the main problem we have with housing and affordable housing, and I think that's what you're alluding to, is what is affordable housing? Right? We use metrics that were created 30, 40, 50 years ago that just don't qualify. What I have proposed, and I will continue to propose once I'm borough president, is that we look at what do we mean by affordable housing. If you cut a swath of about 20 blocks, let's say in Brooklyn Heights, right? The average median income there clearly is going to be a lot higher than, say, Hunts Point, the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. So you can't have the same metrics for Brooklyn Heights that you have here. What I've proposed is when you're doing affordable housing, cut a swath of 20 blocks wherever you want to propose the development, and look at what the average income is within that 20 block swath. That'll be a clearer indication of how much money people can pay even for a 1-bedroom studio. So it's really about the metrics and how we can change them so that more people qualify and more people get more money in terms of housing assistance. I am a fond believer that housing is a right. It's a constitutional right. It's a God-given right. And so I will leave no stone unturned to look at any programs, including funding, to make sure that we are able to do affordable housing. But there's one more thing that hasn't been a big part of the conversation, is that when we're building developments that are affordable developments, one of the things that we've done poorly on is to make sure that the individuals that are working on these construction sites are local hirings. We see a lot of these developments that are happening. You have people driving in from Long Island, from New Jersey, from upstate,
Yes.
making a boatload of money, right? And yet no effort has been done to make sure that we can do that through the ULURP process. We have, through the zoning, housing chair in the city council, that is Rafael Salamanca. I'm sure through legislation, he can do more to make sure that everything is not just about these developments being able to build, but it's also about local hiring. Because with local hiring, then you also help the local economy. And that is essentially a trigger for other ways to help the Bronx. And so you have to have the right metrics, and you have to make sure that when we're building these affordable housings, that people that live here can get first dibs on those jobs. That's how you can help a lot of these issues.
Now that's a problem, and we see it because you'll see at the job sites, you see license plates from New Jersey. Yeah, that's that is definitely
and trying to get them to hire. I've had disputes with developers. They say, well, part of it is the union, which is not totally false, because a lot of times the unions won't take people right from the street and put them to work on jobs. But certainly more can be done by the city, by the committees, and by the local community boards to make sure that local hiring is a must.
Yes. No, that especially now, that should be a priority, and that should be a requirement, part of the
Absolutely.
So continuing on, when it comes, you mentioned earlier about the problems with healthcare here in the Bronx, and having that conversation with our healthcare organizations here when it comes to our communities. When it comes to things, even now we see what's happening with COVID-19. And of course, we know now Yankee Stadium, the big news is a COVID-19 vaccination.
That's great news. Yeah.
Yes. But there have been issues. There are questions. There's confusion as to how do Bronxites go ahead and make an appointment to get the vaccine. There's an article actually in today's New York Post which talks about the fact that the majority of New Yorkers who have received the COVID-19 are white Christians.
Surprise, surprise.
There's a huge disparity, but the majority of New Yorkers who are the most impacted, who have died, are Black and brown New Yorkers. So what is going on here? So my question to you, Senator, is, in your role right now as Senator, and in your role as Bronx Borough President, what are you going to do to make sure that our most vulnerable New Yorkers, our most vulnerable,
it's 12 o'clock,
are the first in line? Because this right now, it's almost criminal.
Yes. I started, it's interesting, when I started discussing this 2 months ago with the governor's office and the mayor's office, indicating to them, we want to know what the order of operation is going to be for these vaccines, because I saw what it did to my county. 34% Latino, 29% African Americans died. And I was screaming from the bleachers about this 2 months ago, a month ago, as we're getting closer, saying, what is the master plan here? I don't want our communities to be the last in line. We talked about essential workers, I get it. We talked about medical workers, I get it. They should be first in line. Our seniors and nursing home, all that I agree with. But Black and brown communities should be the first in line right after. I've been extremely vocal about it, to the point where I've rubbed some leaders the wrong way, where I've told them, you cannot ignore our communities. We suffered the most why aren't we getting more of these vaccines? And the story that the New York Post was no surprise to anyone who's in government in the Bronx, because that's usually what happens, is the lack of respect that this county gets. And part of that is our jobs, I should say, part of that is our fault. And by us, I mean myself and other leaders in the county, for not making sure that we are the first in line. Part of that is a problem of leadership not coming together to force the governor's hand, the mayor's hand, to make sure that these vaccines come here first. They've received the information, the data, and I think they're alarmed, and that's why you're seeing things like Yankee Stadium being now a super location for vaccination. Look, there are some issues within our community. There's language access that sometimes make it difficult for people to know how to get an appointment. There are cultural issues. The African-American community, and I'm not talking about the African community, because sometimes people, the African-American community has distrust of vaccines, and rightfully so. Historically, we saw what was done to that community. And so that has helped some of the lag, not all, some of the lag in terms of vaccination. But again, it's our job as leaders to make sure that we tell people in our community that this is safe. I don't fall within the first few categories. I'm 57 years old, so I'm waiting. But I can tell you this, that once I'm within the group, I'll be the first in line to go get vaccinated and to encourage other people to get vaccinated. So you also have to have an infusion of capital just for vaccinations into the county. I'm hoping with the president's insisting on elevating the amount of money we get for the new federal relief package, that some of that money is being earmarked for vaccinations, especially here in the Bronx. But it's really up to us, it's me as the next borough president, to make sure that we are no longer ignored the way we have been historically in terms of health and healthcare issues in the Bronx. And certainly the vaccination will not be someplace where I will fail. Mona, I've said time and again that we are now 62 out of 62. Yep. If at the end of my fourth term, my fourth year as borough president, if we're still last, I won't run for re-election. I make that pledge now. My pledge is to make sure that, and if we don't improve our unemployment rate by 2%, I will not run for re-election. That's my job to do it, and if I don't get it done, then someone else should follow me.
Wow, that's quite a pledge. I'm sure that's going to be the one part of this interview that people are going to clip and trim and save.
In 4 years, they'll do it.
Oh yes. So, okay. So, Senator, now speaking of being 62, I want to talk about education, and you also touched on education in your opening remarks. Listen, I'm a mother. I have a 22-year-old daughter. I have a 12-year-old son. My daughter attended Bronx Elementary, middle school. She attended a specialized high school. She's just graduated from college last May, and I have my 12-year-old that's here in school in the Bronx. And just as a parent that's always been active when it comes to education, every single year, the Bronx County is
last.
When it comes to proficiency rates. Every year, not 1 year, not 2 years, not 10 years, not 15 years, every year. This has happened now for decades, and there is no improvement.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree very much. Some of our schools are under-resourced, but every year, if it's more resources our schools need, then let's get the resources. If it's more professional development that our schools need for our teachers, then let's get the professional development. If it's more support that families need and children need, we need to get it. We cannot continue the way we the way we are continuing.
Yes.
And when it comes to mentioned graduation rates, again,
Yeah.
something else that we're at the bottom for, which is
Right.
unacceptable. Just overall in the city,
Yeah.
this is, in the school system, this is a problem. As borough president, you will have a member on the panel for education policy. If we continue, if mayoral control is renewed, blah, 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 but you know, how do you plan on addressing this? Like, we cannot continue like this. And now with remote learning,
More problematic.
it's going to be precisely.
Yes.
So,
well, look, I've already said that I'm going to create an education office in the borough presidency. That's never existed before, and I intend to do that. All these topics that are very important, like health, food, education, you have to have a devoted staff members that will look at ways to improve that. Our educational system is, again, indicative of the systemic racism that our county has faced from day one. There's no reason why our graduation rate should be anywhere between 15 to 18% lower than the rest of the state, because then what happens is you continue to have situations where our kids have fallen behind, and kids that come from wealthier neighborhoods are getting on to get better jobs, going to better schools and things of that nature. So we have to do a better job with that. Now, New York, funding for schools in New York State is primarily through foundation aid. So every year the governor sets a budget, we send a counter budget, and about anywhere between 75 and 80% of the monies that are given through foundation aid actually reach what we call needy schools. Right? These are schools that are high needs. There's a second method that I think can be very effective, and it's something that the governor discussed in his budget, is to put another method of funding school is called expense-based aid. Expense-based aid is where we can help a lot of the community issues that we have with our schools. The only problem is that we can do a budget with expense-based aid, but only about 50% of the monies that are allocated actually get to the 10 neediest school areas in the state. And of course, the Bronx being one of them. So the governor has proposed including the expense-based aid as part of foundation aid, so that the percentage of money that actually gets to the neediest districts increases from 50% anywhere to 70, 80%. So those are millions and millions of dollars that we can use in order to provide more funding for our kids. And what do we need? Things like STEM, right? We're behind on STEM programs. I've met with the second highest ranking official with Hitachi Ltd, which is primarily a engineering company. Hitachi, they do technology. They've agreed to do a STEM program and pay for it and invest in the Bronx. So I say that because you're also going to need private investment, private participation in our school systems, because if we don't, we're not going to succeed. We have to have more resources for our kids to take, for example, to prepare them for something simple like the specialized high school exams. We have these programs that they're not efficient. You have private programs that do a much better job. Perhaps we should consider funding these private programs. So as the BP, with an office dedicated to that, I can earmark and be a better advocate for improvement of our educational system. We have some success stories. We have a school by Morrisania in Concourse Village, where the teacher there has done an amazing work with same funding. So these are the individuals that we should look to and say, what did you do so differently with this funding that you received, that you were so successful, yet other schools aren't? And keep in mind that the worst teachers are housed in Bronx County. It's been a major problem that we've experienced for many, many years. Part of that is the fact that even here in the county, who advocates for us, who fights like hell for us to make sure that we don't get the worst of the worst teachers. My office will earmark that, will essentially follow who these teachers are that are in the rubber room and why they're in the rubber room and why they're in the Bronx if they're not in the rubber room. You have to be all over the county educational systems to be aware of what's happening and keep pushing for more funding, because that's the only way we're going to get out of this. We have to put more money into pre-K. Kids that are reading by 3rd grade will be much better readers when they're adults. And so we have to do everything possible to make sure that we increase funding for pre-K.
So I have two last questions on education. One of the other things when it comes in, of course, you mentioned Hitachi and the program that they want to do, but just speaking on it, when it comes to a technological digital divide, what's happened with COVID-19 when we've gone remote is, there was a problem with getting the Chromebooks to students so that they can work remotely. And this is just to families who are not even in homeless shelters.
Yes.
So
it's also of Wi-Fi, right? Technology.
Yes, and then
yes.
the Chromebooks don't have Wi-Fi. So for families, whether they're in or out of the shelter, who do not have internet access, that became a problem.
Right.
And it still is a problem. Even today, it still is a problem.
Oh, absolutely. We chastise the chancellor's office because of that. They are now getting tablets that have Wi-Fi. But really, the city has to do more in the state to provide Wi-Fi to low-income families, especially during a crisis. We couldn't have anticipated what COVID was going to bring to us.
Yeah.
But we have to invest more in broadband and ensure that these companies, Altice, Optimum, all these companies that make a truckload of money over our communities, provide this free broadband services to people that can establish that they don't have the finances to be able to pay for Wi-Fi. We can have all the great technology in the world, but if we can't use it, how's that going to help our students? So I've been quite often on the phone with the chancellor's office and the mayor's office to remedy this problem and to make sure that we look forward. We have a new mayor coming in next year, and I'm sure that all the candidates now, if they're not aware of the issues that we face with Wi-Fi and broadband and getting students tablets, then I don't know what else we're going to be able to do. But we have to work with the mayor, the future mayor, and the governor to make sure that they put pressure on these technology companies to provide the free services for poor people in our communities.
So speaking of the future mayor and education, I didn't have a chance to look back at your legislative record, so I'm going to ask the hot button question. Do you support mayoral control? I know it's going to be up for renewal, but as borough president, will you support the renewal of mayoral control, or do you?
As of right now, I believe that people should be held accountable for the work that they do. So, when we had the school boards in the past, decentralization, I guess, yes. There was a hodgepodge of ways of doing things. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I prefer having, for now, I could change my mind depending on who the next mayor is. But for now, I think that mayoral control puts the pressure on the mayor to develop an educational system that will serve the children of this county. For whatever you want to say about Mayor de Blasio, it was his insistence and push that got us a universal pre-K in the city of New York. Had there not been mayoral control, you probably would not have been able to accomplish that. So I believe right now mayoral control, because the mayor should be held accountable, and if he's not, then we find another mayor that can do a better job.
Okay, so that's K through 12 education, and I just want to now just touch on tertiary education, which is the DREAM Act.
Yes.
For our undocumented college students. So, Senator, and I know there are families right now who are unaware of the DREAM Act, and that there is support and help for their children
yes.
who are either already in college or who are applying to colleges. if you could share with our viewers about the DREAM Act.
The DREAM Act is one of my signature pieces of legislation that I'm very proud of, along with the Green Light Bill. What the DREAM Act is, when you come to school here in New York City, they don't ask you for your immigration status. You get educated K through 12. However, once you're out of high school, then basically we throw you to the street and say survive on your own. If you want to go to college, parents are poor, you don't get the benefits. But with the passage of the DREAM Act, we were able essentially to provide TAP to undocumented immigrants, which is very important in our immigrant community. So now if your child is an undocumented immigrant that wanted to go to college, he can access TAP and Excelsior program in order to go and become a professional. And you know, a large part of our professional class are immigrants. And so I was very proud of that, and I urge all parents to be able to use access the funds that are available through the DREAM Act so that their kids can get a college education. You know, the other proud piece of legislation that I'm the sponsor of was the Green Light Bill. That one took a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of advocates, but it's essentially probably the most proud piece of legislation that I was able to shepherd through the Senate, because now everyone can obtain a driver's license regardless of their immigration status. And the impact of that is enormous. People can go take their kids to hospitals, emergency rooms, to schools. Parents can do so many things with their children who have no fault for being in this country, but now they're able to do things. The better environment between the police
Senator, your wife
and these small towns.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. If you could just, but your Wi-Fi went a bit wonky when you were talking about you know, parents who can now at least, you know, take their children to hospital.
Yes.
Yeah, if you could hear, yeah.
So the Green Light Bill also allows parents to be able to take their kids to medical appointments, to schools. You know, I met a woman whose child had cancer. She had to take 4 or 5 buses, get up at 5 in the morning to take them to treatment. And you know, now she can just drive a vehicle and take them there without being worried about INS taking them and removing them from their families. So, you know, we believe it's going to help close to 750,000 New Yorkers. And so, you know, the economic impact is also going to be great. So I'm very proud of the Green Light Bill.
Yeah, I know in the African community, most certainly a lot of Africans, you know, are entrepreneurs in their own right, and a lot of them drive Uber and Lyft, and now they're, you know, they're able to do that legally and support their families.
Yes,
So
yes,
it
yes.
definitely had a huge impact in so many people's lives.
Yes.
So thank you for that. Speaking of economic impact, right now, and you touched on also briefly the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation.
Yes.
You know, a recent, not so recent, but article in the New York Times, and I think also another publication as well, they talked about the fact that only 2% of Bronx businesses received support, you know, from the city and federal government. And one of the reasons for that number is because our small business owners had difficulty completing the paperwork, the bureaucratic red tape, and there was no support for them, you know, to go through this process. And you know, we have the chamber, we have the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation. What happened? Because, like, I guess this is just something else that we last, you know, last in the list for. I mean, 2% of Bronx small businesses. These are the same small businesses that employ people in our community, and just overall, we know it's small businesses that drive the economy, and in our communities, it's small businesses that drive our local economy. that employ our neighbors, that keep us going, and only 2%. What happened? Where was the support?
It's a disgraceful number, first of all. A lot of it is that people don't have language access, although the city is improving on that based on our complaints. A lot of that is that our immigrant community, they don't have services to, let's say, actually, and we're pledging to provide some of that support. You know, a lot of them don't have their record keeping in the way that's required by city agencies. So we have to provide these services so people are able to put their business records in order so that all the requirements that you have to get these types of loans are in place. So it's a question of how our immigrant community is prepared for this, language access, and what resources we have to get the word out. I think the Bronx Borough Economic Development Corporation's job speaks for itself, when only 2% of people that are business people here were able to qualify. And make no mistake, the immigrant community is critically important to the economic development of any place in New York State.
So how would you restructure the Bronx overall Economic Development Corporation? One,
well,
okay. No,
I would go and hire people that are specialists in the area of economic development. You know, I'd scour every institution. Of course, you have to have local business people also who understand the nuances of doing business in the Bronx. I would scour every tech company to have a partnership here in the Bronx, especially in the areas of helping children with their education. So really, you have to be creative, right? That's what you have to do, and you can't take no for an answer. And
did you finish your thought on that?
Yes, I think I did.
Yeah, I think you did as well. Okay, so I'm going to continue now with the interview. Okay, so Senator, thank you for being so patient with us during this interview. So my final topic that I do want to talk about, it's last but not the least important, and that is public safety and police and community relations. I understand there's this big defund the NYPD movement going on, and police community relations are very frayed right now. But I can speak as a mother, as a parent, that for me, I'm more concerned for my 12-year-old son. I'm more concerned about the high crime that's going on in the Bronx now. I'm more concerned about the murders. I'm more concerned about the rampant gun violence. I am, as the mother of a Black 12-year-old boy, I am more concerned about my child getting shot than with the defund NYPD movement, because if anything happens to me or my children, I'm calling the police. So with everything going on, Senator, how do you see us improving police community relations and also addressing the high crime and the surge in gun violence in our communities?
Well, first of all, defund the police means different things to different people. To me, it means not to take funding away from the police so they can't effectively police our communities. But if you can take away, a certain percentage of the budget for the police, 2 or 3%, and dedicate that to services, mental health services. A lot of times when you have these police interaction with people that are suffering from mental illness, you can't expect a police officer with very little training to be able to adequately deal with someone who's suffering from mental illness, who having some sort of psychotic disorder. But certainly the funding that you're able to preserve by removing a certain percentage of the funding from the police, you can certainly put that into job training, mental health issues, educational training, so that individuals that are committing crimes don't commit them again. What we're seeing now is a spike in gun violence throughout the city of New York. Some people have tried to attribute that or equate that to, or conflate that, I should say, with the reforming of bail, the bail reform legislation. And, you know, I've heard precinct commanders and others try to conflate the two. And the reality is that even the commissioner had to admit that there's no real established relationship between bail reform and what's happening now. And I should remind people that are listening that if you get caught with a gun, you're going to go to jail. That's any violent crime like that will be subject to bail, but you're going to go to jail no matter what. I think COVID, the economic disparity, the economic suffering that a lot of kids in our community go through, because, you know, we see them when they enter the system, unfortunately, but we don't see what's going home. Maybe there's unemployment in the family. Maybe there's an abusive parent, a drug addicted parent, a child that really, how do you expect them to essentially, when you don't foster an environment for them to succeed, how do you expect them to succeed? So if we can get funding for to tackle those kinds of issues before they become a part of the criminal justice system, that is where we should be focusing on. I see almost every single precinct council meeting in the Bronx, and my impression has been that, generally speaking, there is a good working relationship between the precinct councils and the community. And you can't underestimate how important these precinct councils are. You know, sometimes I go to the council meetings and I see but a couple of residents when that room should be packed, because that's a way of you talking to the commanding officer of your precinct or the community affairs officer of the precinct, and you can essentially explain to them your concerns, talk about police community relationships, talk about legislation. But we have to have a good relationship with the police in order to have effective policing. Now, you can't have one without the other. And to have the other, you have to trust the NYPD, and you have to trust that they're going to treat people with respect. We see time and again examples on YouTube, social media, of police officers operating within beyond the boundaries of what they are hired to do, violating every particular constitutional provision that we have, both state and federal. Those are the officers that engage in bad behavior, police brutality, corrupt behavior. Those are the ones that give the good police officers a bad name. And so, we have to get involved in the precinct council meetings so that you see up front what the commanding officer done, and really get involved in the precinct council activities and events. These are wonderful groups, these councils that are strictly volunteer. They don't get paid for the services. They get hell about some of the things that they're engaging in, but certainly we should appreciate them, because all they're trying to do is work for a better community police relationship in this county.
Yeah, people, I know that a lot of people are unaware of the precinct councils, and there is very low community involvement in that, and it's definitely something that we need to promote and encourage, so that we can improve police community relations.
Yes. If anybody needs information on when the meetings are held, again, they can call the precinct itself. They can go online, because most of the councils have a website. Or again, your backup is always to call my office and we can give you the information.
And for our viewers, at the end of this video, we will have a slide up with the contact information for the senator's office, as well as his social media and his websites, so that folks can follow up. But I want to say, Senator Sepúlveda, thank you so very much for joining us today at Little Africa Bronx News and letting us know more about you and your track record in public service. And we will be closely watching the borough president race. This is a very important race at a very critical time in the history of the Bronx and our nation dealing with COVID-19. So, thank you again. I learned a lot in this interview. and I'm sure our viewers will as well.
Well, thank you 100 times for having these forums. They're fantastic. The debate was fantastic, and looking forward to when we actually have Little Africa mapped out so that we can go get food and cultural events and all that. So we're going to push for that, as we promised during the debate.
Yes. Oh, yes. Don't worry. I will be on you on that one. So thank you. Thank you so very much, Senator Sepúlveda, for joining us today. And have a wonderful day, sir.
You too. Be well. God bless. And please stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.